Okay, welcome everybody. I'm delighted to host another one of these amazing live streams where I get to sort of hang out with some of my favorite people to talk about topics that are everyone's really passionate about, really. And this one specifically around magic metrics is even more sort of interesting for us.
After
Hello.
you, Kat.
Yes. Hello. I'm Kat Swetel. I'm very pleased to be here. I'm excited. Yeah, any excuse to hang out with Troy is good. Very pleased to be here. I'm excited.
Well, thank you, Kat. It's Troy Magennis. Likewise. Kat and I have worked together on a few places, and I always remember them fondly. Barry, I think we've had a couple of phone calls. That's all. We had dinner in Sydney. I remember we had dinner when you were in Sydney at one of the conferences. We were in a fairly pricey establishment eating fish.
Really, what we're trying to sort of share here, folks, is some of the challenges that we've seen both organizations and teams struggle with when they're actually trying to adopt metrics. And we really sort of always, when we're working with these types of organizations all over the world, one of the biggest challenges that they have is not only maybe measuring nothing, but what are the right things to measure. And even as we get into start what we should be measuring, lots of questions start to bubble up about what people focus on. They get trapped trying to focus on perfection rather than figuring out what's good enough, trying to understand the difference between leading and lagging indicators about what will tell you if the behaviors and the outcomes you're aiming for or hoping to happen are actually happening and how quickly you can learn. And then the other piece we often find is that people generally tend to focus on just success measures, writing down the happy path as if everything had worked out perfectly. But we also want to think about success and failure at the same time and actually create guardrails about what we're trying to do. So today, what we thought we would sort of break this down, really also around product metrics, process metrics, and technology metrics. Because everybody on this sort of call has a passion for sort of all of these, but a little bit of expertise in more than one another. So what we thought we would kick off with was this concept that many people often get trapped around between the perfect data, the perfect everything before we ever define anything, or what was just sort of good enough. So Troy, why don't you share or kick off some of the stories and observations you've had in that space? And I've no doubt Kat's going to have a bunch of fun stories along to go with our epic opening failure moment that we'll talk about success and failure as we get to that later on. So dive in.
This is going to be the ultimate he said, she said story here. Because, I mean, when you go into organizations, the classic one we got called into one place was we've got to work out next year's portfolio, next year's budget. We got $6 billion to spend. Help us spend it. Well, normally that's a great quest. I would love helping people spend money. But the problem with that is, and even though I was billing by the hour, the concept of actually analyzing every possible thing they could do and putting cost of delay numbers on them and coming up with value propositions and business cases, most of that's complete waste. I mean, out of the 100 things that they wanted to do, they were only going to get 3 or 4 of them done. So the job was really to help redefine them, to sort of saying, well, let's pick the 3 or 4, and I bet you already know what they were or what they are. And so we, in this case, we were working alongside another large consulting firm who specialize in quantitative analysis and billing by the hour. And one of the things that we sort of did was decided that, well, you know, given that there's far more things not going to be done than will be done, let's quickly discard the ones we know are non-starters. You know, the projects that have been skipped for the last 10 years. So we built a quick little tool using PowerPoint. So it wasn't a spreadsheet. We weren't helping them do cost of delay and value analysis. We built a PowerPoint deck, 1 slide per project, put a gold slide and a blue slide in there. We sort of said, the ones you already know are going to happen, put them to the left of the gold slide. And the ones you don't think are going to happen, put them to the right of the blue slide. And then we just ended up with this confusing middle set of stories, middle set of options for them to choose. And, you know, with a quick bit of ordering along those, and we just managed to cut the math down. I know I'm sad too, cut the math down just to the first third of those in that sort of muddy middle area. And, success criteria for us was sort of reduced homicide rates. No one wanted to kill each other in these conversations. They just wanted to, there was so much agreement on what the top 4 or 5 projects were that it was a very, very fast, rapid sort of process. And then, Kat, how did it go?
It went very well. Yeah, I mean, it went well for them. Yeah, it cut down on like a lot of the politicking and back and forth, or it seemed to, right? Because you just don't bother arguing about the vast majority of them. So yeah, it was lovely.
What I love about these stories, right, is often when people think about backlogs of work or long multi-year programs that they want to do, the initial sort of instinct is to size everything, or to prioritize everything, or to put a number or metric on everything, or and this notion of perfection across the entire board really sort of hamstrings a lot of teams, right? And what I love about your story of working in this world is you're focusing on what, like, the pointed parts of the conversation where there is ambiguity that people like want to sense make, rather than sort of say we've 100 items, we've got to prioritize them all. It's like quickly getting to the debatable conversations to say, well, what ones are on the edge or on thresholds, and can we start looking at those? And hey, we can do this as simply as just like open up in a PowerPoint deck and write 100 slides and move these things around in like in a slide view, and we're doing the work. But the quantitative analyses are probably sitting there going, well, hang on a sec, we might get this done in 20 minutes. We need to bill 15 hours and make sure that everything is statistically significant before we do anything. So, how do you help arbitrage between those two modes, because of finding like what's good enough versus this propensity sometimes to like overanalyze and get stuck in the analytical piece of everything?
It's a great challenge, right? Because a lot of the people doing this prioritization are very analytical thinking people, right? So they want to delve into the detail. I find the way in this case, what worked, the phrase that worked for them was that let's first get some relative agreement from this is most urgent to do to least urgent to do. And in all those quantitative factors, when two things are close enough to be equal, let's use those as tiebreakers. So I made the quantitative analysis down to tie-breaking otherwise equal things. And often then the amount of numbers they needed to come up with to do a tie-break was far simpler than having just to start with a blank piece of paper and come up with a number. So I try and make just binary yes or no answers out of the quantitative analysis. So I don't get them looking at the size of the number. I get them sort of saying, is that number bigger than that number? Yes or no? And that tends to cut through the analysis paralysis of those things. But I think you got some feedback on that.
Yes, the big joke was that Troy would go in there and say these things that were complete like heresy for them, and then they'd call me. So that was super fun. But it wasn't that we like said don't do any quantitative analysis, right? It was just that instead of like going really wide and doing some superficial analysis for like a crap load of things, it was okay, we have this really well scoped question that we need to answer, and that's where we're going to invest our energy. And it was more like about movement rather than filling out a spreadsheet, like the same things for everything,
Yeah, I think it's so powerful, like especially when you've cross-functional groups there, right? Like probably your knowledge or best thinking in the room probably gets you far enough then to thinking, well, let's make the investment to actually start finding out by doing the work, right? And I think it's easy to fall into the trap of doing all analysis and yet no action to really find out, right? And helping people balance the what's good enough thinking that this is good enough now to start taking action and really finding out if what we think is true is actually true. Like that's sort of one of these tough, hard bits for people to get a grasp around. Do you have any tips just to help, or tools that you recommend people think about when they're just trying to get into this type of a space, or how they could get started with it?
I like Matt Barkham is another consultant. His technique for getting this to happen was to sort of saying, if you let's just do all the work in alphabetical order, and that tended to spur them on to stop. And he would sort of say, now why are you stopping me doing them in alphabetical order? You must have a reason and understanding why some things are bigger than others. The only tool I think is useful in this case, or an outcome of doing this sort of work, was that for the first time, the VPs actually started talking about what made work urgent, not what made work valuable. And that was a big state change for them, because all of a sudden it allowed things which had a perishability about them to go forward faster than others. And it made them realize that, how they started phrasing why things started before others, we could capture in writing as the policy, as to things that fit this phrase often jump the queue. So of course you got more things next year phrased in that tone, but I think you got to keep it simple. I think if you start diving into a spreadsheet or a tool on this stuff too early, you make it look like you're being too precise, and you just want to keep everything relative. I think if you wanted a tool, Google reference class forecasting or any of those sort of tools. We're not the first to come across this stuff. This has been known for a while.
Yeah, to build on what Troy just said about the policies, the really interesting thing. So a few of the projects or programs in that portfolio, I got to dive into a bit later. And what I found to be really interesting is usually you have the mega project, right? That people just dump things in, this is a high priority, I'm going to tag this other thing on it. And it seemed like there was a big effort to kind of scope things down to just the thing from that piece of work that was actually urgent, rather than all of these other things that are sure, they're important and loosely related, but they don't have the same perishability. So that was super interesting for me as we started doing the work.
Yeah, no, I love these focus questions, right? Because when you start asking how urgent is this, it also surfaces then a whole bunch of assumptions people have. They'll start explaining the why behind these, right? And so I just think that's a great tip for folks to think about as they sort of start thinking, even just at a higher level, of battling this sort of precision versus what's our best thinking or good enough to move. All right, so another one of the topics I think we all want to sort of jam on a little bit is this one, right? Leading versus lagging indicators. This is sort of I don't know, this is definitely my favorite topic of the week anyway. I just love this one, right? And I think when we were even just connecting and debating this idea on whatever social channels we are these days, I think we all feel this is a huge sort of gap in our industry, really, in many ways, right? I think at best, most people are probably measuring output-based measures of success. So is your project on time, on budget, on scope? Anyone has an idea, the first question you're asked is, how long is it going to take? How much is it going to cost? And, can I have 55 features, please, in with that? So that in itself is sort of a bit of a difference that we want to move away from, to be, it's important to know your execution, but what we care about is effect or outcomes. Right? Changes in behavior that demonstrate the effort is actually having the effect we want. But yet for many companies, if they even get to be more outcome based, they all tend to just end up on these very sort of lagging indicators of some sort of make more money, happier customers, team are happier, right? All of these sort of things that you only find out if you have an idea, build the whole thing, put it in market, try and sell it to people, somebody uses it, and at the very last moment they send you money. And trying to measure that for success just seems like the last possible moment you can learn anything is when they actually send you money, right? So the real art, and I think the missing gap, in so much of this space is this notion of leading indicators, right? Early signals for system performance, product performance that will tell you if you're on the trajectory to making money. And I think one of the classic examples is, well, and like I think I was writing about this the other day. I sat in a presentation with a bank based in Asia, and they went through a set of slides about their digital transformation, and they were like, no, we're super outcome based. And I was like, well, how will you know you've digitally transformed? And it was like, increased revenue, happier customers, more products being sold. I'm like, okay, great, here we go. That's great. Then I sat in a meeting with another company, an insurance company in Europe, and I literally sat through the same deck. It was the same deck. I couldn't believe it. It was just, and I was like, oh my gosh, millions of dollars poured down the funnel here, right? And so when I was asking them, like, well, what are the problems you're trying to solve? Like, everybody wants to make more money and have happier customers and more. Wow, that's an insight. Yeah, Kat, right? It's like, wow. But what are the specific problems you're trying to solve, and what will demonstrate you're solving them well? Like, what would be some of those leading indicators? And the bank was an easy one, right? The bank is sort of like losing huge amounts of 18 to 25-year-olds because they're all going to challenger banks, right? They're not going to classic institutions. They're actually doing a lot of financial transactions in super apps, especially in Asia. Right, so this was a very specific problem for them, where we could sort of say, well, a success criteria for you might be growing that market share, or not losing people in that, or percentage of new accounts that are opened from people who are in that demographic is probably a leading indicator for you that you might be solving that and might have a bigger impact on your business. Right, so I think this notion is really missing, and I know you two see a lot of this as well. So Kat, you're nodding along furiously on this one. What are some of the fun things that pop into your mind?
A lot of times what I do, so people will give me their, okay, we'll know that we've digitally transformed when blah, 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 blah. And I rephrase it as the opposite, right? And if you literally can't even say the opposite out loud, then whatever you had on those slides or in that pitch is complete crap, right? Like, I want to grow revenue. I want customers to be happy. Like, I would like to make less money, and I would like customers to be unhappy. Like, if you say the opposite out loud and you sound like an idiot, then whatever you have on those slides is not going to help people make decisions in their day-to-day work. It's just not going to at all.
Barry, I just need to mention that Kat Swetel moonlights for the FBI as an interrogator. So sometimes there's she carries over into the workplace. Just saying.
Yeah, I'm the worst.
But it's fantastic, right? Like they're just such great tips for folks, right? It's just sort of, if you can ask the opposite question, and it's still, if it doesn't make sense, that's a great signal, right? That you're not looking at the right things.
Yeah, it's not contextually relevant, right? It has nothing to do with your specific scenario, your specific challenges. If when you say the opposite, it's just gibberish, right?
Totally.
So Kat, you spend a lot of time, especially in engineering world, right? Like and metrics around delivery efficiency, right? Like simple things like lead times and cycle times and deployment cycles. So when you're thinking about like working with high performance engineering groups, what are some of the leading indicators you often think about looking for to understand if a team is shipping well, right? Even what are some of the things that come to mind when you're focused in that area?
Yeah, the things that people always tend to reach for are like fast, right? We want things to be getting faster and faster. And kind of my question there is like, okay, when will it be fast enough, right? Like, are you just looking for that line to go in that direction forever until you just, I don't know, disappear or something? I don't know what happens when you just like exceed the speed of light or something. But I hear a lot about fast, and I hear a lot about quality, which basically for people nowadays seems to mean code coverage. 100% code coverage. But what I find to be actually helpful, like for the people doing the work, is unfortunately to find metrics that are relevant to the context, right? And so what I'm looking for is teams that are using metrics to increase their optionality, right? So it's not that we are getting faster and faster, it's that we are doing things that increase our optionality. So we can deploy on demand. It doesn't mean that we have 1,000 deploys a day or 1,000,000 deploys a day. It means that we can deploy on demand, right? And, just some of those things tend to be leading indicators.
I really love this one, right? Because this is a sort of, again, a contrary viewpoint, is that often teams will argue it's better to keep your code in a deployable state so you have the option to deploy versus cramming in more features and trying to ship more features, right?
Yeah.
And this is always an interesting debate as well for like high performance tech teams. Is like, what do you want? What do you value? Maybe, I think is what you're alluding to here, is investing in having your code in a deployable state so you can deploy whenever you want and learn something, versus you're going to cram more features in and try and ship things more faster. They're sort of opposites, right? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it totally depends on where you're situated in the technology ecosystem, right? Like if you're some foundational building block platform, then do you really want to be saying to all the applications that are built on top of you or are consuming your data or whatever else, like, I deploy 1,000 times a day. Like, look at all these changes you're going to be getting all the time. Aren't you pumped? Like that's probably not something that everyone's going to get excited about when you're the bedrock. But if you're some like customer facing application, right, that you need to be ultra responsive to the market and all of these things, then yeah, maybe that's super relevant, right? And you might have these, really sophisticated ways of deploying whatever your application is. I think it unfortunately just really matters where you're sitting in the technology ecosystem, right? And think, just like you said, what do people need, right? What do my colleagues need? What do my customers need? Like it again, if there's one answer for everyone, like what they need is for me to go fast. I don't know. That makes no sense. So you're telling me that your product is super compelling and people should definitely buy it because it's better than all the others, but yet you're just making it using the same guidelines as every other product? I don't understand how that would.
But we need standards.
It doesn't work in my brain.
We need standards.
Well, so writing and figuring out like leading indicators is tough, right, Troy? And you were talking about a nice little method to help people actually work backwards from the outcomes they're aiming for into like figuring out what sort of indicators will tell them or signals will tell them we're moving in that direction. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I borrow everything. None of this stuff is mine. But I think there's a slide on it. It's the slide with the handwritten napkin. That's it. So yeah, welcome to Consulting 101. So I mean, this is, I do these rough cartoon style drawings to make sure people don't buy into this is an exact way of doing it, right? So it's very intentionally hand drawn and rough. But it comes from some work out of Larry Mascheroni. I don't know if you know him at all, but he's in the security space now, was in the agile metrics world for a long period of time. And there's a lot of, in the dashboard design theory and showing data theory, there is a very big problem of once we made tools available to every employee, they started building charts. And they don't know why they built the charts. They just did. It's just an addiction. It's like hoarding. You hoard charts.
Sounds like a Tableau dashboard to me.
Yeah, exactly, right. So this isn't just relative to us, but in getting a leading indicator, what makes a leading indicator leading is the fact that someone has made a decision based on it, and it's sort of altered the outcome. So rather than just having the world progress on as it has, and this data causes this to happen, and this is what, how you're going to measure it. We actually have an ability in most of the data we capture in our teams and process to alter that outcome. And that's what we want to do with data. We want to alter an outcome. So first of all, the hardest part is getting people to come up with an outcome. And you mentioned your bank. They wanted to retain and grow the, 18 to 24-year-olds?
Yeah, that segment.
Yeah. Right, that segment. So that might be a good outcome for the bank to do. And now what you're challenging the group to do is sort of say, what decisions do 18 to 24-year-olds have to make to actually cause that outcome to come true? Well, they have to think we're cool enough to exist. They have to think that on a first date, you want to mention that bank's name. We want them to be putting it, putting it on their Facebook profile and their Instagram. I know what the cool kids use. What do you use, Kat? What do you use? Right.
I love that you think I'm 24. That's
there you go.
The best thing about today.
Okay, you're 25. All right. So outcomes and decisions. So in our world, the decision might be we want people to reduce cycle time or to deliver more often. We want them to maybe stop starting stuff and start finishing stuff. So that would be a decision. Now, then you move on to an insight. Well, what do people need to see to do that? Well, an insight for your 18 to 24-year-old might be that other 18 to 24-year-olds like this bank.
Yeah.
So the insight might be that the influencers to that segment of the market like using that bank. And then I would sort of say, and only now, what would you measure to know that? Well, it might be Twitter references to the top 100 YouTube sort of links on I use this bank and it's cool, the Casey Neistat sort of type stuff. Not that I follow him. I'm not cool enough to follow any of the influencers. But if you follow this through and you always challenge people to tell me what decisions people need to make using this data, and then when you build the chart, you put the decision as the title of the chart, people know why they're looking at it. And by knowing why they're looking at it, they're likely to see what you want them to see, make that decision and cause the outcome. So you're actually creating leading indicators. You're not just sort of trying to happen across one when you know it, because leading indicators change too often, I think, in our world for that to be a stable way of running a business. So you might nail a leading indicator right now, but then COVID happens and all your leading indicators are now completely sort of misaligned. If you don't know what outcome you wanted and you don't know what decisions people are going to make, then you have no way of causing an outcome to occur. So I've given up trying to find leading indicators and started on trying to force them to evolve by sort of getting organizations to learn about decisions.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating, right? And I think anything where you're sort of working backwards, like even getting to outcomes is a big breakthrough for many teams, right? That's awesome. And I feel like ratcheting it up is getting to these leading indicators for outcomes as well. And that example, though, you were using of the bank, though, right? 18 to 20-year-olds growing that market share. What decisions do we need? They're opening more accounts. They're excited by the brand. They're coming in there. What insights do we need to see? Is that it's being talked about, it's popularized by influencers. And then a leading indicator literally could be your bank name trending on Twitter, right? Like it's such, like, people can see that logic as you're explaining it, right? And I think that's really powerful because everyone just builds context about the different paths that we can get to an outcome, right? There's so many different paths to get there. It's very rarely one. So what might be a leading indicator today could change literally in a month's time as the world evolves, right? Or you choose a different approach. And I think that's really helpful. Kat, what are some of the things you think about when you're trying to look for leading indicators, like in this sort of space? Like what kind of things jump into your mind?
I think a lot. I mean, obviously, I have worked with Troy and certainly been influenced by him. I think the one thing that I kind of add in there that has helped me is, like, are these indicators, especially when they're like internal facing, are they going to provide me with more maneuverability, right? Like that's a good kind of check for me. It seems like if I saw something here and I needed to make a new decision, could I do that? Could I do that in like a reasonable amount of time where I have influence, right? Where like the window didn't close. Does that make any sense at all? And so like Troy and I worked on something before where they were really concerned with like the time to their like internal market, I guess. And so that's obviously lagging because like after the thing is deployed and in use by whatever company, then we know how long it took. And what Troy started encouraging them to look at is how many requests they had versus how many requests they were fulfilling. So kind of like the difference there and kind of the inventory that they had in their system. And then we ended up with this great kind of test of it because they were, what the heck happened? I don't remember, Troy. Something where a bunch of people were going to be out. And so it was like, I have to make a decision right now, and I have to be able to affect things before this like big chunk of the workforce or whatever was going to be out. And with those metrics, they got together and they're like, oh, shoot, this is certainly going in a bad direction. Like, and we're up against this event that we know is going to happen where a bunch of people are going to be out. Can we do anything right now to affect that where we don't end up at the end of that with like this huge glut of customers that are extremely unhappy? And, it was good, but that was something that even a month before that, like the same thing had happened multiple times before, and they didn't realize until after the thing happened. And they're just like, how could we ever have known? And then bam, like once you see that, you can't unsee it, So it's like, once they saw that, they're like, oh my gosh, we need that information all the time.
Yeah, when I hear you say that, it seems like this notion of urgency is also at play here, right? Is helping people understand, like urgency sort of plays a part about helping people understand what action they want to take when they have indicators to tell them what is happening with an urgency profile. Then it seems like it drives action in people.
Yeah. And you just have to have enough time to actually action it. Like I was in another situation where, it's this big complicated thing, but we were having all of these outages, right? Everyone ends up on this incident call. It's terrible. We're all like crying because it's the same incident basically over and over again. And we were like, how can we know this is going to happen like before we end up on the incident call? And we found a leading indicator where when one of the requests took greater than 30 seconds, which yes, I know 30 seconds is like ridiculous, but when it took greater than 30 seconds, that would just like tank everything. But once one of the requests took 30 seconds, you only had like 2 minutes to act or something, like to interact with all of these different systems. Or like, you know what, that doesn't even count as a leading indicator at this point. Like when you don't even have time to like actually ping the people that can intervene in that situation, like throw that out. That's not useful for us at all. It might be helpful in like our further investigation, but do not set an alert on that. Like that's just gonna make people sad.
Nice. Well, right. So one of the other areas we wanted to sort of dive into was this idea of success and sort of failure criteria, right? And a little bit what you were sharing there, Kat, is almost like this thing is happening. We can't really take much action. It's like a mega leading indicator, but hey, at least we've identified it. It influences the situation. But it's sort of alluding to a field I know you're super passionate about, which is of chaos engineering, and this notion that we can't necessarily control all the outcomes all the time in these very complex systems, right? Like small incident in one area can cause catastrophic failures. We've seen it from someone leaving a comment in a line in AWS and taking out a whole region. So there's something interesting though about creating these guardrails of not only success, like what we think of product success or a process success. We tend to always just focus on that, but also defining failure modes to create more of this sort of like an envelope type of effect of this is the window we're shooting for, rather than just setting a bar that we're trying to jump and if we get there or not. So do you want to share a little bit about some of those ideas as how they show up both in engineering processes, and then Troy, maybe hear a little bit from you in terms of process aspects there would be great.
Yeah, what I am really interested in, so I don't know if you've seen the Rasmussen Triangle, right? But basically Rasmussen said that there's always this pressure, like cheaper, 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 right? And then there's always this pressure, like, we want to do less work. We want to do less work, right? And we even have systemic things like in the US, we have like laws around these things, right? Accounting practices and all of that reinforce these things within our businesses. And then we have the safety pressure, right? Like avoid incidents. But really, when things are kind of operating at the like peak performance for do less work, minimize workload, and like minimize the cost. So that kind of like, yes, we got there, oftentimes tends to be right before you tip into chaos as far as like the actual systems are concerned, right? Where you dip into something that is not safe, right? You cross the safety boundary, and that's like an event, right? And then the incident happens, the event happens, and then it causes pressure back because we don't really have a good idea most of the time in most companies and most technology ecosystems where the safety margin is. So like we'll say, this is the SLO for whatever this value chain or this transaction or whatever, this is the SLO or this is the SLA that we're contractually obligated to provide for our customers or whatever the case may be. But we have no idea, like, we know whether we violated that or we didn't. And oftentimes we have no idea how close we are to violating it because there are all these other factors, right? And we don't know what they are. We're not really incentivized to figure out what they are. And the only way that we know where the safety margin is when we violate it and go, oh, shoot, here I am on an incident call again. So what I'm really interested in is how do we in production find ways to approach that safety boundary, like find out where the safety margin is and then back off. And so we're not actually causing any failure. We're just kind of saying like, oh shoot, once we get here, like this is about where we start to see that cascading effect across all of these different systems. And so now we can like tune our alerts to that, and not just did we violate this or not, right? But like, how close are we? And if we're constantly doing things over time where we're approaching the safety boundary, right? We're not violating it. We can see if it's shifting over time, and we can see like the, whether it's a latency curve or whatever else, if it's starting to have like a really wonky shape and it just keeps getting wonkier, then we can say like across engineering teams and operations teams, hey, our operable space is getting smaller and smaller, like that safety margin is creeping up on us and we're losing maneuverability because that's going to bearing down on us. What the heck are we going to do about it before we get to an incident, right? I don't know.
That's right, Kat. You're going to do pharmaceutical drug trials next, aren't you? And that's the classic sort of case, right? Where they don't, an outage for them is a very unfortunate incident for some family. But we still have to learn this stuff and do these and understand what too much is too much or too little.
Yeah, like it's fascinating. When we talk about like high performance technology systems, like when do they fall over? right? Like a sort of classic example. When I was working on the project for Channel 4 in the UK, is a TV show, and Jamie Oliver was their sort of main TV star. He's this cook, right? So, and Jamie's show would sort of go on, it was on at 8 o'clock in the evening or whatever. But at the end of every show, Jamie would always go, and the recipe is on my website at www.wetrecipe, right? So the servers would go from like 5 people sort of, hanging out at 8 o'clock and I'm watching it to, a tenth of the UK population just like hitting this website at the one time. So you can imagine it didn't go so well many times, right? Where the systems would just fall over, right, under demand because of peak demand at the moment. But when I hear Kat talking about these ideas of like what are these thresholds, right? Like how will we know when the systems are ready to fail? Because if we see a ramp up curve that we can't scale horizontally to meet, then it's going to fall over, right? And but you're sort of learning what those thresholds are the more it happens. So the fun and maybe bad thing is every week we got to learn. When Jamie said go watch the show, if the site stayed up, we were like, yes, right, we're within this sort of success and avoided the failure condition. When the site sort of had like bad latency or went down, we'd be like, okay, damn, right, maybe some changes we've made have hit the performance here. And I think it was just a fascinating way to think about trying to because you have to guess. You never know. Like it could be a Wednesday that there's another show on that more people watch instead of this cooking show. So some weeks you'd have like tens of millions. Sometimes you might have like half of that figure. But it was kind of a fun way to think about the success and failure criteria and what was the envelope we were trying to create, right? Because it's always moving as well. Like all these things are such moving targets, which is always fascinating to me, I think. But it sort of ties into that question you also said a little bit about asking the opposite question when you're writing success measures, right? I think building tension into metrics is a really powerful idea too as well. Like in e-commerce, everyone always wants to improve conversion, right? They're always trying to like, if we improve conversion, we'll generate more revenue, hurrah. But the easiest way to improve conversion is in e-commerce. What any guesses on that one? We'll
just reduce the number of people coming to your site.
Right, yeah, or reduce the price, basically. Yeah. Right, so if I do a sale, 10% off, but you're also impacting profitability by doing that, right? Like if you just keep discounting, you actually don't make any money. So I think that the interesting thing about these is creating tension between them as well. Like that innovation's really happening if you can make conversion go up and profitability stay the same and go higher, right? It contrasts both things, and it helps to, as Kat was describing with this Rasmussen Triangle, or it keeps you in this window. And that's where magic innovation is happening. And so I think it's really important for us all to think about that. Like if we optimize for just one measure, we're probably, making a trade-off we might be not even aware of. And I think that's kind of interesting to think about success or failure or positive and negative questions are another good sort of sanity check, I think, for folks when they're trying to design these dashboarding tools.
Agree. There is a couple of tools that I use for that. I don't know if you got the slide on the polarity management one there.
Oh yeah. Give me a sec. I'm just.
Yeah, this stuff about trade-offs and balances is absolutely the one of the harder parts that you have to set up. Oh yeah, so this is, I mean, for dev teams, this sort of stuff, you're actually in probably every time you put a chart up or you say you're measuring something, and this could be at the product level or it could be the same sort of 6 dimensions take place. And they're like, you're in a 6-way tug of war. Now, every single one of them is awesome until you pull too hard on one of them and cause damage elsewhere in the system. So a lot of the time what you're doing when you're setting data up to coach teams is to make sure that they understand the early warning signs that when we sort of said it's got to be perfect quality, that perfect quality and no defects means not shipping anything. and that's not what we wanted, right? So we've got to constantly challenge people to work out, how much is too much for each of the metrics, as well as how little is too little for each of the metrics, and help them trade wisely about investing in improving in each of the 6 dimensions that are I think are available here. Sort of doing the right stuff. You could easily get a lot of throughput by just doing really simple, low value stuff. Doing it right, doing it fast. That's the one everyone wants. Doing lots of it. That's the Uber one that everyone wants. And doing predictability. But the one that everyone always forgets, which makes metrics and numbers completely useless, is if you're not building a system where people can keep doing it, it doesn't matter what data you captured in the past. It's not leading or lagging. It's just junk. So if you're going to actually measure anything, first of all, do no harm. First of all, make sure that you've got a measure to make sure that the system is operating in a sustainable way that you can keep doing this stuff. And then move on to these really cool metrics like cycle time and lead time and throughput and escape defects and number of rollbacks and do all that other stuff. But if you can't prove to me that the system is able to continue the way it's operating, I don't care what data you capture.
That's so awesome, because I think it ties back to Kat's points as well about even in chaos engineering, like keeping the system safe within these sort of tensions, or even this point of like why being able to deploy at any time is that's the optionality you have. You can learn if you're able to deploy whenever you want. It's fascinating. All right, so before we dive into what is going to be a very sad moment for a lot of our guests, is we're getting towards the end of the show. I know. Don't get too sad, people out there. But, like all these things, this is always a little bit of an experiment for us. And we're just trying to share things that we think are interesting and maybe inspiring for you. But in order for us to keep doing this, we really need your feedback. And the way you can do that, it's really amazing. You might have a device like this in your house somewhere. It's called a mobile phone. And if you take it out and open up your camera and try and take a photo of us, but there's also a dinosaur somewhere on the screen. If you can find a dinosaur and take a photo of it, you're going to get a little link that will invite you to sort of give us some feedback about what you think was fun, interesting, things that we could do different. If you want us to come back and talk about this again, what you'd like to hear more of, less of. If you're crazy enough to even subscribe to this channel and hear more shows that will come on in the future, who even knows? But so in a sort of final or wrap-up question, both for Cass and for Troy, what would be sort of, a tip or a takeaway that you would give folks, as they're starting down to figure out what are some of the magic metrics that are going to really matter to them, or going to be helpful for them? And maybe, Kat, if you don't mind kicking off, what would be one little bit of advice that you'd sort of give people just to take away and that they could put into action?
I don't know if this is like, we've covered a lot of stuff, right? So my first piece of advice is to re-listen to all of this so that you can find, but I guess the one thing that we didn't talk about yet that I found to be really important, and Troy is always like on me about it, but keep track of what metrics you don't have. So if you have a metric that you've determined is really important and actionable across a value stream, but only some of the components or some of the teams or whatever are able to provide that, you should like have a blank space and be like, we don't know here. We just truly have no idea. So at least people can like develop intuition about it a bit. So that would be my one thing that I don't think we've covered through the rest of this.
Yeah,
Troy?
no, awesome.
That is a great one. No data is data, and often people don't look for it because it's not there. Hello, and then they go off and make sort of bad decisions on it. And that's sort of where I like to drive people from. I sort of say that your employees are already making these decisions now. Your job of your data is to help make them that decision better, to cause an outcome faster. So you're this isn't anything other than what people are doing all the time. So first of all, have a reason for showing them the data and really know what you're going to highlight to get those decisions better and faster. So I keep sort of saying, if you use this data, what decision would you make? And because you don't have this data, what decision are you making poorly? and just get them to list them out. And it's a long list. in most companies.
Yeah.
Prioritize it, start it, and just start with the top one.
Awesome. Well, look, it's been great to have you both on. It's always fun to I always learn a bunch when I listen to both of you. So thank you very much for sharing not only some fun stories, but lots of tips and even models and tools for people to actually put this stuff into practice. The feedback for myself is I'm going to improve not having the live stream open on multiple tabs. If anybody ever wants to come and see how many tabs I have open, the answer is many. But it's been really great to have both Kat and Troy here to really share some like real nuggets here. And so I just want to appreciate you both and say thank you. Thank you for that. It's super fun. Don't forget to share your feedback with us, folks. We love it. It'll encourage us to keep going. If you haven't found a dinosaur, still's your last chance. And have a great rest of your week, Kat and Troy. And thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.